Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
No, I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. We record these episodes a couple of days in advance of when they get released. But as far as listeners are concerned, release day today is the 30th of June. Now, this is a very special day for property people. And it's an extra special day, hopefully, for you, Stuart. We're sort of going to be predicting the future here. Do you want to tell the listeners why this is going to be such a special day for you?
Today's completion day on our new build property, the day that we should be getting the keys to move into our new family home.
I really do hope that it goes well. And why is it so important that it's particularly this day?
Because it saves us around £27,000.
So let's really hope that it does happen on the 30th of June and not the 1st of July, because that's an awful lot of extra money for a one-day delay.
Well, I don't know if I should say this publicly, but I'm going to. You know, these things in property that, as far as we're concerned, it's an inherent thing which we think there's certain lines which should never be crossed. And one of those is never not complete on a completion day. And that has happened to me, where we actually missed a completion day by one day. And I thought the world would end. I thought, like Chicken Little, I thought the sky was going to cave in, that the rains would come. But no, we were missing completion. And I can't remember the specifics of why. I think it was down to the bank releasing funds. And I remember speaking to the solicitor. Obviously, I won't mention names. I'll keep the innocent protected. But they said, don't worry, Stuart. We'll just put it all through tomorrow and we'll backdate it yesterday. And it was a 5-second conversation, which took all of my worries away in an instant. So, although, of course, I absolutely want this to happen on Wednesday for a number of reasons, not just financial ones, but emotional ones as well. So I'm hopeful it doesn't happen, but there's also part of me that says it will all be okay in the end.
I'm sure it will. And while we've been talking about how important it is, I don't think we've actually mentioned so far the key words stamp duty holiday, which of course is where your saved money or potentially extra money is going to be going.
Yeah, so this is the last day where you can get relief on properties valued at over 250,000, which for us investors is 3%, 3% on the first 500,000 and 5% thereafter. You would still pay, but it's the other relief. So I think so my wife and I still pay 3% on the value after 500,000. So we're paying a little bit of stamp duty, but not, like I say, not the 30k it should have been.
Yeah, I can't remember the rates off the top of my head, but below 500,000 during the stamp duty holiday is 0%, unless you're buying a second or additional home, in which case you still have to pay that 3% for the additional home rate on that first 500,000, and then 500,000 upwards is the normal rates of whatever they are, which I can't remember off the top of my head, plus 3% if you're buying an additional home. And of course, Wales and Scotland are slightly different as well. So Scotland actually ended their stamp duty holiday as originally planned at the end of March. So I thought, I suspect you haven't looked into the figures particularly, and I haven't either, but I'll just throw in an anecdotal headline that I saw that suggested that Scotland has not seen a reduction in demand after their stamp duty holiday ended. So obviously at the moment, the property market is considered quite hot and lots of people are rushing to try and meet the stamp duty holiday deadline. And the property market in Scotland, I believe, has continued to be hot and continued to be busy even after their stamp duty holiday ended, all the way back at the end of March. So I think that's sort of promising for, well, I say promising, I don't know, it depends whether you're looking to buy or sell or where you sit in the property market, but promising that the stamp duty holiday ending in England, at least sort of downgrading slightly from 500,000 to 250,000 being free, that it won't affect the property market too much. I've got some sort of counterfactual anecdotes to that as well. But what do you think, Stuart? Do you think we're going to see a slowing down as the stamp duty holiday changes?
I don't think so, because I think there's a lot of momentum in the market. Of course, we don't know, but for me, momentum is really, really key. And I was just thinking about it, and like you say, we haven't researched the Scottish market thoroughly, but I'd imagine there's something to do with average property values that would support that market. But then for us, we know that we're tapering down, so there will still be relief from the 200 up to 250k, which, regardless of what property prices we see in the southeast, as a national average, that's still the national average. And I heard a stat very recently that something like over 25% of homeowners, are still looking to move. So a quarter of people in the UK still looking to move. That's not going to stop just because we hit this arbitrary date that's been set. So I think that momentum will carry on. How long that carries on for is another question. So what are your thoughts around that? Your counterfactual thoughts?
As I collect data on sort of property listings and things as part of the service that Patma provides, I get to see some of this sort of playing out in the data in very early warnings of things. So I mean, you can see, or I have seen in that data, that there's been a marked increase in properties coming back to the market in the last week to 2 weeks. So really getting up to the crunch point of this initial deadline at the end of June. And there are properties obviously falling through that at the last minute they're failing for whatever reasons, but right up against this deadline. Some of these properties have been sold, obviously subject to contract and whatever else, as early as sort of January, but other ones just in May, for example, sort of much sooner, and they're now falling through. So I don't know whether those failures of sales will have a negative impact on the market overall, or whether the market is still sort of busy enough to just absorb them, and whether they'll sort of obviously be bad for chains that are involved and bad for the sellers on those particular properties, but they'll just go back out to market, be picked up, and there's still lots of demand, and new buyers will come along and proceed with them quite happily under the new stamp duty levels. So yeah, there has definitely been an effect of this deadline on property sales that have been in progress. But of course, I can't tell what that's going to mean for the next few months of those properties moving forwards.
And it doesn't stop people from wanting to move. It just changes the price of what you're looking at, potentially.
So you think that as these properties fall through, they might be willing to accept lower prices?
No, I was thinking more about the buyers in terms of, now you've got to factor in the cost. So you will factor that in. So that may just change the banding of which properties you look at. But we'll see how that plays out. I think the one thing we do know, obviously, not being economists, but one thing we do know that the pandemic has created is that people, A, want to move and are now, B, a lot more specific about where they would like to move. And for some, that might still be closer to the centre of town, but for a lot of people, we know that means moving out, getting more space, and that wherever that is. So moving itself is still something people want to do. It's just the financial constraints of what coming back in as regards stamp duty that weren't there for however long that's been, almost a year.
Speaking of moving, as in the actual act of doing it, I think you had some experience as you were trying to deal with competition against everybody else who was also trying to move at the end of June. Well, yeah, how have you found that?
Well, we were in a predicament, and anyone that's bought new builds may be able to share it, but we were told, so we exchanged on this property back in December, the end of December, so 6 months, and we're told that we would only be given 14 days notice of when we could complete. Obviously, that sets a number of challenges. Fortunately for us, we were renting, although that has been challenging as well, to be honest, but we won't get into that here because we don't have 14-day notice on the property. We have a month. So we've had to endure a bit of a squeaky bum time where I just handed in the notice and said, let's go for it. Of course, we've been speaking to the developer, but they can't tell you formally that things are going to be okay. They can just go, okay, it's looking good. We've been driving to the property every week to have a look at where we think it is and said, okay, let's do it. But the other challenge, of course, is the operational one, not just handing in notice, but planning removals, planning your utility switching, etc., etc. But the thing that sparked me into action was my wife, before we got the official approval, said, I've been on Facebook and people are saying that they can't get removals for the day that they were looking for. And of course, that then sparked me into life thinking, oh, crap, yeah, because that is one thing I am not doing myself. I remember doing that last time 10 years ago, and I'm 10 years older now, so that's definitely not going to happen again. And on the site I use, which has always been very good, anyvan.com, they give you a little calendar of moving dates. And the price differentials, it goes up. So obviously from the 25th of June up to today, the 30th of June, today you're paying something like, I'd say it's getting close to 100% premium. So if you wanted to move on the day of the stamp duty, you're paying almost double for removals that you would have done. And I certainly don't point blame at anyone for that. That it's just the fact. That's simple economics, isn't it? Supply and demand. There is a lot of demand, and therefore supply is short, and so they need to put their prices up. But then, of course, it starts tailing down. So we're quite fortunate that we can move actually, as of this recording, tomorrow or Friday. So I've been able to tamper that down. But I'd still say we're paying around 50 to 60% more than what we would have paid on any normal month. So there's a bit of a premium, and that is something, if I'm being brutally honest, I hadn't considered. And of course, now, bloody obvious, isn't it, that was going to happen?
Yeah, quite. As you say, it is when you actually sit down and think about it. But it's these sort of small details that typically you just don't occur to you, isn't it? So you've only got a few days of overlap between your expected completion and when you've got to be out of your current rental home, yeah?
Well, and I think we're lucky to have that, because I think if we were in an owned property and we were in a chain, I don't think we'd get that. I think it would be, get the keys, you go. It's
that's something that's always, I don't know, I can't think quite the right word, but I've always thought is adding to the stress so much of house sales and purchase is the fact that typically you've got that one day and all of the paperwork's got to be finished, the money's got to move, you've got to get all of your goods out of your old property and then transported and put into a new one, hopefully, assuming you don't want to be in transit for too long.
Wasn't it you that had removal men with engines running outside properties?
Not removal men, but a group of friends who helped us on our last move when we had problems completing on the new house. Yeah, we'd loaded up, packed everything into vans, driven around, and we sat outside, not being given the keys because there were issues that we've talked about before. We won't go into now. But that made it even more stressful. The trouble is, of course, especially when there's a chain involved, there isn't really another option, is there? Because each person along the chain needs to be able to move into that new place. So you've just got that one window. And of course, because you're coming for rental, you can relax. You've got days.
Oh, yeah, relaxing. That is a word that is not being used in my household at the moment. Oh my goodness! But here's some words which you probably won't hear me say ever again. But spare a thought for the solicitors at the moment. My poor solicitor is a really good guy, Josh. I'm going to name him Josh. If you're listening, thank you. But as the month has worn on, I can just. The poor guy, I say poor guy, we're giving him business and he's dealing with 3 property sales and 1 purchase for me, stroke my company. And just as the month has worn on, I can just feel the weight of the conveyancing process bearing down. And, you think that you take what we're doing times however many thousands of people doing this on the same day. And it is, when you really think about it, it does put a lot of pressure on a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very stressful day for a lot of people in this country. And I do wonder how many of them are actually going to spill over into the first and just backdate the paperwork.
Yeah, I think that will happen, and I think that government and common sense. Let's not have that debate, but it would make sense that for anyone that had exchanged, that was completing, for whatever administrative challenges there were, whether it was a day or 2 or 3 later. Personally, my belief is that they should firmly be getting that holiday, and you'd like to think that there wouldn't be any challenge to that, but I guess we'll see as time wears on.
Yes. So to avoid me starting to rant about government and bureaucracy, you've recently started exploring Airbnb, which I think is new for you, and I certainly haven't looked at it at all. So I'm curious to learn. What's the experience like getting started with Airbnb?
Well, really simple for us because the property was already ready. So this is the property. It's a studio flat. Mentioned it many, many times, but it's in Kingston. It's the property where the purchase fell through. We had someone that was supposed to be staying short term. She then decided she wanted to stay long term, even though that's not what we agreed in writing or verbally. However, she did leave. The property's now empty. We've got a new buyer, but we've got 2 or 3 months of conveyancing now to go. And property sat empty, but it's been well dressed and got everything in there that anyone would need, close to the river, etc. So I just thought, why not? I've had a look at it before. The only thing I've had to do was get someone to go and put a lockbox outside the front door so that guests can obviously get access without me turning up. And I have to say, it's so far, touch wood, been a very pleasant experience. The guests we've had have been great. They're all 2-nighters. I've allowed it for up to 90 days rent because hopefully the conveyancing process will complete. But it's certainly given me an added dimension because, and I've heard people say this before, but on Airbnb, it feels more like you're running a business because, of course, you need to make sure it's, obviously it's like running a small B&B. But I just think about how people model this up. And I think, well, obviously once the guests are finished, you need to go and change all the bedding, provide new towels. I like to put some fresh milk in for the next guests and a little packet of biscuits just because I think it makes everyone feel warm and cuddly, and that's what you want, people to feel good when they arrive in your property. But I've only gone on Airbnb, so that has been really straightforward. I had listed somewhere before, but it didn't go live. But it's just been really, really simple, been very pleasantly surprised. But of course, you can use channel managers now, which would put the property onto booking.com, Spare Room, or wherever else properties go. But of course, if you use a channel manager, they then take a percentage. So rather than get too embroiled in it, given that it's only one flat and it's only for a short time, I've just used Airbnb, but it's been so far so good.
I've got numerous questions, but seeing as you have just started with Airbnb, how is that technology from a sort of ease of use and making the money go in the right places and all of that sort of side of it? How is the actual Airbnb, very specifically that site experience, been?
Extremely simple. They've got you'll know the phrase GUI, graphical user interface, is for people like me, people that might not even use a computer regularly. Obviously I do, but it's just made so simple. It's a step-by-step process. Everything's very clear. I was very fortunate because I had all of the photos from the property anyway, so uploading that was simple. They even give you comparable properties where you can look at their listings and they put them up in front of you whilst you're filling the information so that you can say, look, they say to you that this is what a good property looks like. Because obviously when you first put a property on, you don't have reviews or anything. So clearly the first barrier they want to do is make sure you get people in and start getting those reviews. And how they do that is they ask you to apply a discount. for your first couple of listings, which I did, and also offer discounts for people that want to book weekly. But given that we'd ended up in a bit of a mess previously, where we'd done a little contract for someone for 2 or 3 months, and then they decided that they didn't want to honour that. I should say that they did in the end. Once we questioned integrity and ethics, they did, even though they'd notified the council to say they were being evicted, which we'd never said we were doing. But moving to Airbnb has made that very simple. And I can see now, actually, that we could theoretically make quite a bit more income from Airbnb. Of course, the effort level goes up. But I think the bit that my brain likes is the fact that I start thinking about, how do we automate this? Well, we could get cleaners in that we trust. They could then pick up the keys from the lockbox, go in and change the bedding. They could put in the milk and the biscuits and so on. And I could see my brain that likes thinking about business sees that more as a business. So it's something I would definitely be interested in. And my wife certainly would be at some stage. But your question was, it's just very, very simple to get it up and running. I think it's just getting those listings, the first guests to come in. That's the big challenge.
How much does it cost? What's the slice Airbnb are taking?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm sure it must be around 15%. Must be around the 15% mark, which I'm more than happy to. But you can add on a cleaning fee. So we've added on a cleaning fee. Again, Vix, my wife thought it was very cheap, so I just added on a £30. A lot of people add on £30, £35. So that covers you for, to be honest, it covers our time. And, I was there with my wife on hands and knees, wiping the floor and cleaning the floor. Because, of course, you've got some, commitments more than ever in terms of the COVID precautions and so on. But it does feel like you're doing the job. And I think for me, what I quite like is the engagement with the potential guests. I was going to call them tenants, but customers. And it feels like they are more. I mean, I tend to think of tenants as customers. But of course, they're there for a long time, and you tend not to hear from them. Whereas these, send a couple of messages, where can I get this, and how do I get to the river? And it's quite nice. But again, what I really like about Airbnb that I've seen is that it's clearly, now it might just send you this after you've advertised a property with them for, let's say, 2 weeks, but it also said if you provide this check-in information, so you can provide photos of where the lockbox is, details of how to get to the river, how to get to the train station, and actually do that all up in front. So again, I can see how it can all be automated as a business. So I think for anyone thinking about it, it's certainly a good, viable route for a business. And I think once you get it right, is highly scalable.
Just out of curiosity, and since you've obviously been speaking to them a little bit, do you know where your guests so far have been coming from? Are they international travellers? Are they staycationers? Are they business people? Or?
I think they're guests. So one of them that stayed last weekend, they're coming for a wedding, and they've come from Hampshire. The previous guests, they were definitely foreign, but I don't know whether they were just visiting in this property or whether they were, in the UK using it. I know another couple that have booked. They are looking to buy a property. Funny enough, and that's how I rented it previously. But so they just wanted a little pad to look for, and again, it's just out of town. So I would say certainly not business, more pleasure. Guests visiting for events. So far, events and property hunting seem to be the two things of the 4 guests that we've booked so far.
Have they all been weekend bookings so far?
Yeah, but that's because I've kind of blocked the midweek, and that's really because I just didn't want to have to do anything midweek. And again, that's a great feature of it. You can block days, weeks, whatever suits. If you get a channel manager, you can do that across the platforms. But I like the fact, because I said, actually, if I have to do it, I don't want to go out and do it in the midweek. I'd rather go on a Thursday or a Friday, get it ready, and then do that again. So you can plan it around your day. That might mean that we're missing out on certain guests, but that's the decision we've made because it's really just it's topping up the mortgage that we're currently paying.
Yeah, and it can't hurt, can it? And apart from anything else, you get to learn how Airbnb works and try out something a bit new and something you can perhaps explore further in the future.
Yeah, and actually another part of your question which I didn't answer was, how they pay you. And it gives you a certain number of options. And it was strange because if you choose PayPal, you get paid instantly, which I think happens when the guests leave, because there might be reasons why they don't transfer that to you, I guess, in case there's any issues. Or if it's a bank transfer, it takes 2 or 3 days. But again, you just click a button and that's selected. So I've just chosen PayPal. But again, as soon as someone said I've checked out, we got that payment was in immediately. So again, that's all really, really simple. A bit like a conversation we were having previously. So far, because I've got the time and I'm sort of cognizant of when people are in, I send them a text on their first morning saying, how is everything? Just to make sure they are happy. Yeah, because it's a bit like, when you go out for a meal, if you start eating your meal and there's something not quite right and no one comes to the table, it annoys you. And at least then, if someone's got any sort of quirks of the property or something not happy with, hopefully we can answer that straight away, and means they're happy, leave a good review, and we go again.
Sounds really good. And I think perhaps we'll have to add replacing your salary from Airbnb lettings to a mini-series on replacing salaries.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one, and a little bit more technical based on occupancy rates.
Yeah, exactly. There's I think occupancy rates in serviced accommodation generally is really what you live or die on. So yes, perhaps we'll need to invite on an expert in such an area to help us out with some of those calculations.
Yeah, and it's obviously a lot more seasonal than standard letting. Well, more seasonal than, say, even students, which we know when they come in, but definitely a seasonal.
Yeah, so seasonal and less predictable. Right, well, I think that's us out of time for today. So thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed it, please do tell someone else about this podcast. You can ask them to search for The Business of Property on any podcast application, or send them to thebusinessofproperty.com, which is also where you'll find show notes and links to anything we've talked about. And Stuart and I will talk to you again next week.